Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. The book we're going to talk about today is Mr. Toad Went to See a Psychologist. This book is really hard to read. Just before we started, it took about 5 minutes dealing with the name of the book. Okay, anyway, we're on this episode. There will be 4 main points. The first one we'll talk about is what's in it for me when I'm done with the book. I'm going to say it again. Why this book is easy to read. Use the story form to concepts in packaging psychology. And then it extends to psychological concepts. I think the main point of the book is that it is about 2 different psychologies. A state of self called triple. The other is called the 4 psychological positions. Those are the 2 concepts. It's got it all in this whole story, but I think the book is a little more upfront. That's why I've put a lot of additional information in there. Then we'll get down to business. Let's talk about understanding this knowledge first. What's in it for you? The first point is, of course, to improve our interpersonal relationship. Because I think I should study psychology. I'm going to love this psychobabble. A big part of it is just wanting to go understand what people are thinking or know what you're thinking. So you can be more, after this more psychological knowledge, you can know to say that what's the state of everyone? It's possible to empathize with you. You're in, whether it's with friends or with when colleagues are discussing, you'll know what to say. He's going to react in this rather emotional way. Maybe it's because of his state of mind in psychology. If you yourself are in a depressed mood, or you might find out yourself, sometimes you do it on impulse. The type of thing you'd know to say when you may have entered a certain number of different after understanding the state, I think it's a great way to improve your relationships. It's a very helpful second. You can also improve your performance. The reason for improving your performance is because our job is sometimes high, sometimes low work performance. Then you know your own. It's all about what different states of mind you're in, or just below the psychological lows. You can go ahead and utilize that skillfully to guide yourself in the comparison, a high productivity situation or a situation where you want to be in. You'll also be able to switch better when you're relaxed. So I think for your above the performance that's very helpful, at least for my own use at the moment. Like when you report to your supervisor, he'll probably being in a bad mood or saying his state is in a different. When I'm in a state of mind, I'm prepared to say different things. Come and talk to the supervisor or yourself. You can also use different psychological constructs on top of the tips to get there. Said I'd use one underneath the other. It's a different kind of up and down. Tips for coping. And then there's the promotion of sexual relations. I think it's helpful too. That means, of course, because in fact, like the 2 of us, all you do is talk. There's a time for communication. Maybe if some of the communication for couples who have a rough time of it, it's possible that they are 2 missed calls. It's not the same. If everyone is in a different state of mind, there's a good chance that communication won't be as smooth as it could be, because later on, we will talk about the fact that in the 3 ego states, he will mention that there are child, parent, adult. It's possible that if both of them are in an adult state, communication is smoother than if it's a child state and a parent state. That might turn out to be it's like a man who's been lecturing a man, being read to all the time, feels like communicating on a possible. But if 2 people, what about them after they've learned this technique, can all be oriented to adults? If the state of I think the communication will be much smoother after that. But I think we're both in a state of adulthood. Yeah. I'm occasionally in a sea breeze. Well, we can go on. What about point 4? Because there are a lot of things that you might have, for example, or you've already got a kid of your own. Well, if you can, I've learned this kind of communication, tips for disciplining children. It'll help with the kids too. It's basically like being a child. But if you're in a childlike state yourself, it'll be like 2 kids fighting. And then if you're in a parental situation, you'll have more control. And then if you're in an adult state, you might be able to talk to him about it. You can handle your family better. Relationship between, if you're both mom and dad, we all know the mechanism. You 2 can play different roles. Let's say a person is playing a parental role, a person is solved with the adult state. all sorts of problems for kids, he can also learn to say that in addition to beyond the childhood state to an adult state. It is important for people to play the role of what kind of mechanism is I in? When there's a problem, I try to solve it rationally. What is the state of a person who is in the state of his parents? If you both understand, you wouldn't have to say that they're both in a childish state. It's like everyone's fighting. No one's fooling anyone. If you don't like anyone, you really do. It's like a bunch of kids fighting. The fifth point can be strengthened. Own financial management. Because we're making an investment, or when making business decisions. In fact, it is often the case that it is based on logical and analytical linlege. At this point, you're actually supposed to go into the adult status. Well, if you're not in adult status, when you're in a situation where a lot of times you might make bad financial decisions, because if you're in a childlike state, sometimes you operate on intuition, you're probably in the stocks, you'll panic, you've become more biased, a child's word that you're on the stock market. It's easy to get panicked and put things in place, but if you're in a state of adulthood, you'll be based on that. The question goes to the analyst. So if you learn this, we'll talk about it later. I think when I came to the mechanism, I felt that it was in the whether it's the future of life, growing up, or in the heart. It's about communication, family communication, even in terms of financial decisions, I think. So I read the book myself. After that, I felt a sense of the feeling of the new software that has been instilled. It's got a sense of elevation. I think it's a good idea to share this with good for everyone. Then finish the first part. It's all about understanding the benefits. Let's get to the point. I'll see half of what I saw before. That's what I'm talking about. Some of the stories he's been told. What's the advantage of telling this story? Well, if you like it, for this kind of introductory movie, you can click on the link above us, if I'd put it there. You can watch our previous movie. If you didn't put it in the previously on this page, just search for yourself. But I'm still on my side of the fence. Just a quick note to say no. This book, for those who have seen the last movie, what the hell are you talking about? What exactly are the other concepts mentioned in that story? He's actually talking about his protagonist. That's Mr. Hammer. He felt a little depressed, and then he has to live in a pack. It's more like a fairy tale town. He's got a lot of friends with different animal partners. These animal companions cared for him because he found out that Mr. Hama, he's starting to get a little depressed. That's why he has a tendency to do so. So his friends invited him to see it. The psychiatrist then proposed the 3 types I just mentioned, different states of self, as well as 4 different psychological orientations. These psychological methods, after he gave him this psychological method, it's a significant improvement. Mr. Hama's in a state where he understands better. Tell me what a difference I'm in now. It is also indirectly in the state of, I'm going to take his depression is treated, or maybe it's made him better. That's why it's a book. The main point of the story is to illustrate this point. That's the point of the story, actually. Did we mention the movie when Mr. Hama went to see a psychologist for the first time? The psychologist actually used better. A very blunt example tells him that you should be on your own. I'd like to see this psychotherapy program. It's only useful if you don't want it. You don't have it in you. I really want to get better at this psychotherapy. It doesn't work for you because you're forced to come and see. Or are you, for the sake of others, unless it's you? From the depths of my heart, I feel like there's something about me that needs to be healed. This treatment has improved. That's the only way to be effective. He was in the middle of a conversation. There was a reference to the concept of a thermometer. It's the thermometer in your heart. They're there. Many different conversations. In the middle of it, he'd ask this, Mr. Hama, tell me what you think of your current. What is the mood at the beginning? He said, I might be at a point or two. And then as he became more aware of these concepts, after that, he felt like saying that the score of the thermometer of the whole mood, it's a continuous upward movement. So he may be from the middle of the process. He'll learn to read in 3 or 4 minutes, 5, 6, and then the whole thing. On the end of the tutorial or after the whole chat, he'll probably make it to the 90th percentile. Just leave. Compared to the first time I came here, roughly, if you want to see what we talked about before, this story, what the hell is this about? I think the last movie we did was about the same thing. I've already said a lot, so I'm just going to cook too. It's just a quick trip. Okay, then the next party is ours. The focus is on the three selves state, because the entire Mr. Hama is seeing a psychologist. It is built on, it's based on a theory, the first method. There are three states of the self. Let's take a step-by-step look at what it means. Three states of the self, starting with the self-status. Let's start by defining what it means. What about the state of the self? You'll have to start by putting your current psychological status is categorized as child parents as well as adults. Are you currently doing any things you're eating right now? Whether you're eating or like we're doing now, you can have any movie you want. There is a state of being. These three different states can be alternate. On the same thing, there are also different psychological states. It's the whole thing, a basis for the ego state. The structure of the ego state is, in fact, he is in. There's a Canada in the 24th season. The psychiatrist suggested it. When he brought it up, he was based on the patient. He sees him as he's a psychiatrist, so he sees a lot of different patients. And then he realized that, in fact, there seems to be one among all the different patients. The rules in general seem to be fine. Summarized the three differences condition. So he took the information on these patients is summarized as follows. These three different states of mind. He's a whole theory. It's called intersectional analysis or communication analysis. He's a conversation between two people. To do the analysis, he'll always be guiding his patients. So what do you think you're doing now? If the state of the feuille, with the state of an adult, if you look at it, what do you think is a reasonable solution? It's a problem if you're a child. What would you do to solve this problem? Where do you see yourself now? It's just the two of them talking to each other all the time. So this one, Mr. Grandmom, he went to see a psychologist. He did the same. In the words of Mr. Grandmom and two psychologists, the process of communication to write the story, because the original invention, he's based on his relationship with the patient. Conclusions from the conversation. He actually published a book on the original. A long time ago, in 1964, there's a new one out called This Book by Games People Play. It's him. It's the whole thing. Communicating and analyzing the foundations of this psychology. I didn't read the book. I still think it's a good idea. Mr. Grandmom's book and the current online book, some more up-to-date information. I'm going to do some organizing. But at the time of the three ego states, I'll talk about his criticisms first, because he's based on his relationship with the patient, intercontinental. The conclusion of the observation is therefore that his current has a lot of science on it. The evidence would be considered to say that he's not serious enough to organize like this, because his first one is organized at an earlier point in time, possible data analysis for that era. It hasn't flourished yet. The structure of his entire book is, again, because he sees other patients on his own. That's why it's more like popular psychology. It's a lot more rigorous than that. There must be a but. He said so himself. A lot of people went to question his mores. The first one is called the pole. The lack of empirical evidence that he is observations based on clinical trials rather than claims of them. It's rigorous science because it's rigorous. Scientific research may have to make a distinction, background of each person's birth. All different states we need to get the mutation under control, but he's not as strict as he's been so far. And then there's the question of measurement, because the patients he's seeing might be biased. His whole measurability is not as precise. He has also been criticized by many people for saying that he's a little too simplistic. The whole psychological process has changed since we human beings. It's not as simple as that, is it? That's all we've got. We've got three states and nothing else. That's why some people criticize Bo. He said that he felt that he might not have sufficient, considering the fact that each individual is different from the other. The same cultural background may be different. Various environmental factors in society, psychology in action. It shouldn't be so easy to come back to modern times. There's a lot of psychology out there. New Heal model, it's been developed. He's 20th century. It's a psychological ritual. In fact, his method has already been it's outdated, but I think it's a good idea to learn. After that, it's not so bad. It's a good place to start. It's a little bit of an insight to say that the framework of psychology. So, based on these points, in fact, he is more favor, a rule of thumb. He is a compilation of clinical experience. It's not a concept. Very scientific studies say that we humans, it's just split up like that. But I think a lot of psychological knowledge and structure, it's all a bit out of the way experience. Because the human psyche it's complicated. Because it's not always possible. Measurement, because it's hard to quantify. There are also a lot of it's a new concept. Did you know that there are many medical professions? Different studies, every few years it keeps getting overturned and overturned and overturned. It's been debunked, for example, by the fact that you were in the first place. What you say when you're working out. Your knees should not extend beyond your toes. There's a lot of this stuff you might be after. The study will disprove the previous minute. It could be overturned in a few years. So although this theory, it's a little out of date, but I think his foundation, the logic of the organization, is quite complete. There are applications for you after you finish the course. I think it's appropriate in certain situations. Okay, let's start with the simplest. What about the 3 ego states? Basically, you can think of it as the inside of your head. Have you seen the recent release of 2, Inside Out? Yeah, he's coming out with a 2 recently. It's not bad, but you should imagine. It's actually the same as the one with the curved spine. Inside your head. There's a console. There are 3 people controlling your brain. 3 people. A parent, a child, an adult. Then I'll start with the kids. Kids are easy. It's a little version of yourself. You can imagine what it would be like. From 6 months of age, you'll be around 6 or 7 years old. It's just a very small time. Versions of you have not been disturbed or influenced by social values. We'll talk about it later. But it's a small-time version. It's true that it doesn't have much social value, but he'll be a little bit taken in by your parental influence. Some of you are 6 or 7 years old, and you probably already know. You know what you're doing. What about your other adult self? You can think of it as a more perfect version of yourself. You just do things. You're very determined. You can do anything. It's very clear how to analyze and solve these things. You can imagine being an adult version of yourself. And then there's the parents. He's not his parents. Your parents are your parents living in your head, not your own parental version. Your own parental version is usually adult version of myself. The feeling that your mom and dad are living inside your head. It's your dad or your mom, either one or the other. Maybe you weren't raised by your parents. Maybe you're from a technical family. Anyway, it's a base, the one with the parental role. It's in your head. So you've had these 3 things in your head ever since. There's 3 of them running the show at the same time. Your brain is these 3 states of self. Basic theory. Sometimes when you're doing something, it could be a child, it could be your manipulation. Sometimes it can be adult manipulation. Sometimes it's your parents who run out and manipulate you. So, like I've been reading Musk recently, he'll talk about it. Musk looks like his father sometimes, even if he hates him, but because his dad lives inside his head. So if his father ran out and manipulated him, he's going to act just like his dad. It's his father's way of manipulating him. But if it's a child, when he came out to manipulate it, he just posts some really douchey stuff. How could he be such an asshole? Posting some really asshole-ish shit. But sometimes you think he's a very adult person. Himself, for example, he's solving the problem. He's talking about how his SOSIN is going when he was building his rocket. You'll think this guy's really good. Seems like it would really solve a lot of problems. You'll see if you can apply the framework. In fact, he's all 3 of them. It's just in different manipulators. That's why he looks different. Sometimes 3 people will fight. It's all about the handling. It's a mess. For example, when we work together, it becomes a state of great execution. Roughly speaking, there are 3 ego states. Inside your head, you can visualize these 3 things. Why are these 3 ego states? It's probably in everyone. It can be used in many scenarios. It is because of these 3 states of the self. This psychological theory, it's based on the most basic facts of being a human being. Organizational structure. The first point of the most basic fact is that everyone was a child once. So you'll definitely have a child in you. You couldn't have been born 10 years old. All of a sudden, suddenly I was born 20 years old. I've never played like this since I was an adult. You must have had a childhood phase in each of your lives. So there will be a child. You're in your own head. No matter how much you want to erase it, it's impossible. A fact that cannot be erased. As long as I'm a human being who can analyze, you'll have a child of your own, for sure. The second point is that all the people we can talk to, a socialized human being, all by the parents, role-playing. Of course, it's possible that this parent would consider you an orphan, or you were in the nursery, but there will still be an older person or a mentor. There will be a nurturing role in your life. You can't say I'm a kid in the middle of nowhere. He grows up and socializes on his own. It's unlikely. Basically, everyone has a foster parent. It's just that this breeder is normal, maybe biased. Mommy and daddy. Generally speaking, there are more moms and dads. Or it's possible that you might be a more specific example is that of the nursery school, or that you may have moved through different foundational families. When you grow up, you'll have all sorts of different parents, but all in all, you'll have one that's a nurturer, roles, or multiple parenting. So here's the second fact. What about the third fact? Basically, every normal person has one. Problem-solving skills. Whether the problem is big or small, it could be as big as the Musk solution. Problems with the rocket may be small. Just tell me what I'm having for lunch today. But as long as you're a normal current, you can be a man in the community. You're sure to have the ability to solve problems, has the ability to solve problems, the ability to have this state of adulthood. So why is this theoretical framework? It's so popular. That's why it's so appealing. It's all about these three facts. Basically, you can communicate normally. It's a common experience for all of us. Then the experience will be really good. The impact is very much on our ability to make a difference wherever we are in the decision-making or in our when faced with different problems. How did you deal with it? So these three facts are, this framework of three ego states it's an indelible fact of being human. Well, that's a fact that we have a lot of space to explore. And then we'll get to the fact that previous experience will definitely affecting the future. Like you, the grade at the time the house was built was, it will definitely affect the upper echelons. This whole thing, it's like your parents must have had a legacy. The genes are in you, and so is this thing. So let's start with the kids. Your kids did it when they were little. Everything, every decision, it's all going to affect your future, even if you think it's possible to say how it's going to affect. I've been here so long, but basically, it's like a grade. It could be somewhere deep inside your heart. Sometimes I didn't even realize it. So I'm saying that every single one of them, since we all have them, beginning, middle to end, there's a time in everyone's life when you can't do anything about it, from the beginning to the end. So early on, from you, everything a young child receives in his or her time, in fact, it will affect your future, growing up values, because that's what you think. We are born in Taiwan. So the information received may be in the form of Taiwan's education-based, so you don't care what you think about marriage. And then it's just a matter of what you do with yours. Different interpersonal relationships, perception of your problem-solving ability. Actually, it's all because of you when you were little. The education of you will now begin. Do any of the behaviors you did from 30. The decisions you make when you're 40 will affect you when you're 40. You're 50, even 60, and you're not exercising now. Will it be worse in the future, or will it be worse? That's your influence. It must have been influenced from the past. There will be, in the future, on this side. In fact, it is mentioned in the book that, in fact, since you were born until you're 4 or 5 years old, every single thing that happens to you, all of these things can actually have a negative impact on your personality. The impact on development will be very significant, and it also involves saying how you are. Look at yourself and others. We'll talk about this later, explain in detail why. But then again, so far you're a parent. Any of your actions, any decision is inevitable. It's going to affect your kids even if it does, whether something is conscious or unconscious. You're always like, play the game. You are. It affects your children. Or you usually like to slide your cell phone around yourself. You're still talking about why kids like to slide on cell phones. What's there to say? Because you've been acting like it. That's the way it is, even if you don't want to. Show him this side and he'll just learn. It's all about the genes on this side. It's genetic, as is your behavior. It will be passed down to us. Speaking for ourselves, our current, regardless of ability, it's all inherited or learned. Though we're growing up, in the course of this thing, the more it's getting simpler and simpler, like a lot of things we do. It's a matter of destiny or genetics. We can still make adjustments later, but we must first recognize it's a fact. It's a fact that you know these things can't be changed. You can't change the past. Who are your parents? What's your past experience? It's basically immutable, but there's room for us to work on it, but you're not. It's not possible to recognize things that were born or things that happened in the past. It's already happened. There's a basic concept here. That's why I think that the part where a little summary of my own growing up is what it's all about, in understanding what state you are in. And it should be in line with where you are right now. To get along, the past is the past. The birth has happened. Those things can't be changed, but what I am now can change what I will be. It's just that I feel like I just had a little recap. What's the first point of that? I feel all kinds of feelings, or the choices are really your own. Make your own decisions. At the end of the day, it all comes down to this. We were just talking a lot about Arnie. Parents asking your parents will affect your genes. Your parents influence your behavior. It's very much like there's nothing you can do to change it. I was only 50 years old. How could I possibly know what my father taught me? But in fact, you're still at this stage of adulthood. You can already judge that. How are you going to make your next decision? When you're faced with something, you can choose not to feel sorry for yourself. You have a choice. Then I think that after learning about this set of your options after the system, it's going to be enhanced. You can tell by saying I'm there now. It doesn't have to be this hard, or that I am now. It's about whether or not we need to be facing each other. We're all so angry, or we're just doing it. Such impulsive behavior, these things. You should be able to control it now, instead of keeping you tied up in the past, the way you are now, the way you used to be, because that's what my parents look like. So I'm just going to continue the tradition. You can decide what you want to be. This is a very important point. That's basically what we are. 3 states, a general overview, and then in the middle of it all, I actually thought of something. Does everyone have only 3 states? And on top of this theoretical framework, yes, that's right. In this framework, there are only 3 ways to treat people. Because of you, I just said that. From the past to the future is from childhood to adulthood to old age, your parents are indelible. A lot of these things are not adjustable. So it's true that under this framework, there are only 3 ego states. Yes, but what? Actually, it can be categorized into more details. It's not just these 3. There is a slight difference between the 3. We'll address the difference later. Further explanation, that's what we were talking about earlier. The 3 ego states are based on being human, an inconvenient truth. You have a childhood, you have a future. You have a knack for problem solving. So we're kicking back to the front just now, then I'll do some later. Surveys or in books. In fact, it's mentioned in the whole story. The total is actually, in more detail, you can go into 5 ego states. The 3 that we just talked about, it's just kids, parents, adults, or children, parents, adults. It's 3, the kids with him. Parents can actually be further subdivided into 2 different types. There are 5 types, 2 kinds of children, 2 kinds of parents. If you're an adult, you're 5. I'll give you a brief explanation of the breakdown. You started as a child. There are 2 types of children. There are 2 states of children, one of which is called the free-range child state. Fly away. Yeah, that's right. The other is adaptive childhood. So what's the difference between these 2? I'll explain briefly. Free traveling kid status from you at the beginning of the birth. You're free. We all are. Free. What's the status of the children who are traveling freely? You've been around since you were born and you probably cried all you wanted to. You scream when you're hungry until you're maybe 1 or 2 years old. You're still a bit of a free agent. Just do whatever you want. This kind of kids Adaptive kids. After the parents started to intervene, you'll start to develop an adaptive childlike state. Maybe you're in trying to play with fire. Mom and dad might say, kids can't play with fire. I said, don't touch the power socket. That's when you learn to say, oh, mom and dad don't want me to touch the stuff, and I don't want me to touch the socket. Then you will. Adjustments are made to comply with this rule. Adaptive state, when the parents or when society intervenes, you're still in the same boat. Kids, you may not understand why, but you do what he wants. That's why it's called adaptive. There are two kinds of parents. One type of parent is called a controlling parent. One type of parent is called a nurturing parent. How about two? One that actually corresponds to our two different parental states. One is called nurturing but not barking, a kind of barking but not breeding. What about the nurturing parent? He's in charge. The function is to nurture. He's mainly in charge of feeding the kids' tummies. He should be fed. He's cold, so I want to dress him. This is the state of nurturing parenthood. The most typical symptom. You said, hey, satisfy his needs. That's parenting, a controlling parent, that is. Calls without nutrition, or mostly in the area of education, you have to talk to the kids about what I just said. I'm not allowed to play. I'm not allowed to touch the hot water. This is the kind of thing you have to teach him. You want to control him. But control might sound a little negative, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. You think if you don't teach a kid, he won't know how to do it. That's why you have to teach him. So, under the 5 ego states, in fact, there is no such thing as absolutely good or absolutely bad. They're all necessary. As I was saying, parental control doesn't mean bad control, because a lot of times you kids just need to be in control, but you're out of control. You might just have the opposite effect. Free and adaptive children. There's nothing wrong with any of it, because free-range kids can do whatever they want. But if everyone wants to do something, they can do it. Then society could become very chaotic. Adaptive children, you'd think. He's just very obedient. It's like saying you don't have your own self-will. There's nothing wrong with that, because often that's what you need. Something, say you're in an organization, or if you're in the company, that is, adaptation of the company's rules. You can do whatever you want in the company. The company would be in chaos. So in this case, every different state, there's no such thing as good or bad. It's not like I have to be an adult every day. I think it's best when you're an adult. I'll solve every problem that comes my way. It's not good or bad. Basically, this is the whole self-improvement